Welcome to Divine Decode, the space where we slow down, breathe deeper, and explore the sacred balance and dance between soul and self. I am your host, Pragya Malvia, and tonight we are joined by Veronique, who is a luminous teacher whose work beautifully weaves together mindful movement, poetic storytelling, and spiritual awareness. Through her practice, Veronique helps people connect with their inner rhythm, the divine current that reminds us of who we truly are beneath the noise, the rules, and the rush of everyday life. Her presence is both grounding and expansive, inviting us to see that the divine is not something that we chase, but something we remember. So, tonight we'll journey through the essence of connection, freedom, and grace, and maybe by the end we'll find a softer way to meet ourselves. First of all, thank you, Veronique. Thank you for being on our show. It's an honor to host you today.
Thank you, Pragya. I'm very happy to be here.
Veronique, I genuinely want to start with this that, the word divine, the podcast itself is Divine Decode, and the word divine, it means something which is different to everybody. It's very subjective, right? For some, it's the faith that they have, or the intuition, or the energy, or their work. It's divine for them. So, what does divine connection personally mean to you? What is it to you?
Yes, I love this question. And more, it's been talked about what is sacred and what is magical or what is special. And one might say, what is God or spirit or source? And in a lot of ways, I keep coming back to it's in all things when our lens and our orientation is towards this upward attention and really feeling, embodying that there is divine connection and interplay in all of it, then it all becomes divine. It all becomes sacred and special and magical. And in the very sense of that, it's also really important to regard that, especially I think now and more, it feels like now more than ever, where there's a lot of attention to what might call shadow or darkness or energies that can be depleting or weighty, is that even through the darkness, there is divine there. One of the great inspirations from my time in Bali was witnessing their morning offerings to the gods. And they would have these bamboo baskets of flowers of different colors and rice and incense, and one was offered to the good God and one was offered to the bad God. And it really helped display that there's an offering for light and darkness, that there's divine in the suffering as well as the joy. And when we can breathe through what is actually happening, then we're able to really transcend the darkness and come back to the light.
That is so beautiful and so beautifully you've put it through. Thank you for that. And I
Mm.
truly, truly agree to it, something which is very special to you, something which actually makes you the happiest and which actually, makes your soul meditate and your mind, it is at peace. That makes so, so much more sense. And I really want to ask that this understanding of your divine, did it change or deepened through your personal and teaching journey, or how was it, like what was the breakthrough of it?
Yes. So I have often talked about my entry into the yoga practice having a bit of a false start when I lived in Los Angeles, and I had a friend who took me to a yoga class, and it was really a fitness class, very asana focused. And I thought I did okay. And then afterwards, the teacher came up to me and he said, actually, the beginner class is at a different time. And I was so embarrassed by this that I never went back. And it's so funny to think about that moment in retrospect because, in fact, I was a beginner. And why should we be embarrassed to be a beginner, right? And so there's a lot of conditioning, and I kind of start there and I have to go back in time and then I'll bring us to the present. There's a lot of conditioning in my family of to-do lists of science and math and things that you can see and define. And though I grew up Catholic and went through First Communion, confirmation, there was this sense of God in terms of this is what's passed on through family versus a religion, so more of a cultural attention. So presently, this feels like through the different religions, through the spiritual practice, which has been the journey through the yoga practice of really seeing yoga beyond asana, beyond the poses. I realized actually, as I had been telling the story about this initial class in Los Angeles, it really began before this. And this was when I was in my early 20s and I was assisting the father of a family that I was nannying for, and he led meditation retreats. And I joined him at Esalen in Big Sur, California. And I remember marveling that I was able to really embrace the silence. It wasn't challenging to me, and I was witnessing that it was challenging for many. And I realized that actually as a child, this gathering together in family in my childhood grandparents' home, my father's parents, we gathered like this often of just really listening to storytelling. And I think of that as early imprinting of my grandfather and my grandmother telling stories of the old country. They were originally from Hungary. And and I think about that in terms of this divine connection and really like what is ours to hold. And so in the original coming together in a circle, right? This is from the dawn of time that humans gathered. And so I think of that as this initial circle, right? When like human form first arrived, I almost imagine like there's like one circle of people, like the original people around the fire. And then as the population grew, now it's people all over the world of different cultures and languages, and yet it's all from the same source. And I really feel that deeply, that the stories that my grandfather told and the silences that I was able to steep in, and being through that transmission of being told that I was a beginner and having feelings about that, it's almost as if like the more that I learned, the more rigid and perfectionistic I became and had to quantify. And then all of that had to dismantle when I then finally was reintroduced to the yoga practice about 10 years after that beginner class incident, and really fell in love with the teacher and felt so welcome. And I think that it really shows this highlight of readiness. Some of us have this instilled in us from a very young age and are tapped in. And then there's been this conversation recently of this remembering, or this remembering of perhaps a past life, or perhaps the initial imprinting of this lifetime of what it is our soul's essence is for. And so when I think of divine, I think of light. Sometimes I think of the goddess Lakshmi. Sometimes I think of Ganesha. Sometimes I think of my sacred grandmother guides on both sides. And in fact, I see it in my dog. I see it in the trees. I see it in your smile. And it's ever present. And coming back to what I began with is when we see through this lens, then we're really awake to it. And when we're awake to it, we share that spark through each other's eyes. And this is why when we're really tapped into that divine spirit, we'll meet people and it's like, oh, nice to see you again, because it's very clear that we're all reconnecting through that spirit.
Oh my God, so beautifully put. And yes, totally get it, because, we genuinely actually sense that connection. Sometimes there are so many people and so many things. As you said, you see it in dogs, you see it in everybody. There are dogs literally walking past you, and you look at, or you look into their eyes, and you're like, oh my God, this is such a beautiful soul in there. And that is so beautifully said. And I genuinely feel, and I truly agree to whatever you've said. Also, how the divine, it shifts as we do, becoming it becoming less about seeking something above us and more about, honoring what's already alive within us and within humans. That is the best takeaway that I take from you today. Also, you often speak about freedom through connection, and you've also mentioned it, right? So, a phrase that sounds almost paradoxical sometimes. How can, surrender, something that, feels like letting go, and freedom from that resistance that we actually have? How does that actually guide us towards liberation, wherein, we're just stuck with this very bad feeling of abandonment and, letting things go? So, how do we do that?
Yes, that's such an important question, and it's very much a forever practice. One of the greatest lessons, and when we seek for the teacher in all things, and part of this, so zooming out, right, in the macro, there's a quality of water when it's cold, and there's a quality of water when it's warm. And so I think about that in terms of the attention to the surrender practice, because it's hard to know in real time, because what we tend to do is we lean into what's familiar, and we're not able to let go for the sake of the unknown. And so one of the great orientations around this is to really think of, when you have your eyes closed, hand to heart, does this person or this place or this situation, this conversation, this encounter, does it make me feel like ice, or does it allow me to feel like steam? So another way to think of it is it constricting or is it expanding? And so one of the things that tends to happen, the more we're connected to divine, the more that we feel awake to the spiritual practice, is we become very potent mirrors for others. And what that does is it really heightens the magnetism. So as much as it draws people who are like-minded, like-hearted to us, it actually starts to really illuminate those who are not in alignment anymore. And this is something that isn't really talked about in this space, because it's very uncomfortable and can be a little bit controversial, because it can sever relationships. It can lead to heartbreak, to loss, and that is really, really painful. However, in the surrender practice, right, and the letting go. So I think of this as a really powerful somatic exercise. So if there's a noticing of like a gripping, a grasping of the way that things used to be, and this is probably like our hardest thing of letting go, is because we in our mind think, well, I've invested so much time or possibly money into the business, or, I've, professed my love to this person, or, I purchased this house. I really thought that this was going to be my forever home, or whatever the construct of the thing that we're trying to let go of is it of our highest power, of our highest self in the present moment? Sometimes choices that we make in the past, they're in alignment at the time, maybe not even then, but we arrive to this moment and then there's this feeling like it's not settled. And we confuse that. We actually might think that we are confused about it, but it's actually very clear that if there's some kind of friction, that it's no longer in alignment. So it's really important to look at the surrender as actually a courageous, and so the courageous and the vulnerable piece are very intertwined. And when we can really tap into our own vulnerability, so this is when we travel from the mind to the heart, and also the mind that's in the gut, right? So we let go of the analytical so much, and we really tap into the place of compassion, not only for ourselves, but also for the other people involved, or for the circumstance that's here. And so the liberation, yes, we want that for ourselves, and we also want to liberate the others, right? We don't want to stay in a relationship that feels misaligned for us, because if it feels misaligned for us, then certainly it's going to be misaligned for the other people involved, whether they're cognizant of it or not. And so that somatic practice that I indicated is, so when we feel like we're gripping, right? And so this is really powerful. It's like we might exaggerate the gripping, like making tight fists with our hands, and then we really deliberately let them go. And so you could, do this even with your hands in your pockets secretly if you're somewhere in public, or if you live in an urban environment and no one is looking at you anyway, and you can do this practice. And it's actually just the practice alone is really liberating. I was sharing with a friend yesterday, this is actually something that my father uses all the time, is he says, if you're wrestling with a decision with something, you flip a coin and then you cover it, and then you don't look at it, but you just know which side that you wish that it would land on. And so usually that is really helpful in the surrender practice when we're in this indecision, or maybe we're in this space of we're not sure, we're not wanting to let go. There's so much power, and I think about this in regards to what we've been talking about, right? When divine, universe, God, your guides are 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 beckoning you to transmute or move through this next level of integration for your liberation, there's an opportunity for you to let go of something, and it's always terrifying. In my experience, it's been terrifying, and every time that I've stepped through that fear, there has always been an incredible acceleration for this next incarnation of my life to show up in really powerful ways and magical ways that I couldn't have possibly articulated in my mind. And so that's why I really feel like this practice of returning to the heart, to the gut, and allowing space for it to marinate, for you to meditate on it, then you can come back and you can decide that through empowerment, that the surrender practice is available to you, and then you do it with grace and with kindness, and and then you're able to let that go, and it does take time. That's really what's been coming through for me a lot lately. I was thinking about that on my morning meditation this morning. In particular, I walked very early and was with the full moon, and I was just tracking in my mind the different countries that I've been in for each of the full moons this year, and just thinking like, wow, time, it just goes on, and the things that used to have such a hold on me, they don't presently. But because it's nonlinear, they might grab me later down the line and then I'll have another opportunity to practice surrender again.
So true, so true, so true. And I genuinely feel that it is such a grounding truth, to be very honest. And that freedom that you talk about, it does not always come from control or escape, as you've mentioned, but from, softening into what it is and knowing what it would do to you, and, just letting it be. Just letting it be is what I feel works. And I really, really resonate with the insights that you've shared and the advices that you have. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
When we talk about your teaching, it blends with storytelling and movement so gracefully, right? And I also mentioned this when I was introducing you. So, how does this narrative, how does this help us rediscover the divine presence within our bodies, within our surrounding? And how is the blend basically helping us? That is what I really want to know.
Yes. When I first began teaching, I felt really called to bring my theater background and the storytelling of my grandfather into the space. So, this honoring of my love of gathering to have thought-provoking experiences. And what was really clear very quickly is how when one of us is experiencing something, all of us is. And it's through our own unique lens. And yet there's a certain thread that is very common. So oftentimes when people would come to my class and they would say, how did you know exactly what I needed to hear? That I was experiencing something. I mentioned it in a way that feels universal so that people can see themselves in the situation. So, for example, one of the themes that I continually practice is slowing down. It's something that I have a lot of fire in me. I have a lot of drive. You might say that I'm type A, OCD. I love organization and to-do lists and getting things done. It's one of my favorite pastimes. And so sometimes I'll have these self-made urgencies. And because I like to make use of every moment of every waking day, even, how could I be productive in my sleep, trying to figure that out. And so I was poking fun at myself, saying how I was in the practice of slowing down. I had just come back from retreat in Costa Rica, and I was driving one of our guests back to her home. And because of, I don't know if there was a delay in the travel, or maybe we were just getting home late and I wasn't expecting to have to drop her off. So it was setting me off my journey by about 40 minutes. And so I was speeding because I wanted to just get home. And wouldn't you know it, I get pulled over by a police officer. just as I had been feeling like, yes, on retreat, I've really slowed down. I'm really going to carry that with me. And it's so wild. It's like as soon as you get back into the car and you're in the rhythm of whatever it is that you're doing at home, there's a certain acceleration that happens. And so I was sharing that in one of my classes, and of course everyone relates to it. Even though I live in a place where a lot of people are retired, there's really no reason for them to be rushing. Maybe they have appointments, certainly. However, why do we tend to pack things into our days so much? Because there's so much celebration on being busy. And so one of the themes in my book, Shine On and Off the Mat, and it's in my Shine membership as well. And there's guided practices of meditation, of vinyasa and yin style classes that accompany this. Is what if the new move was to do things as slowly as possible? What if it was actually really like it felt like an achievement? Like, I wonder how slow I can do this, right? And so I've been really playing with that of, okay, what actually can I let go of? Am I doing these things because it's habit or because it's actually helpful? Am I arriving to certain places a little bit late because I have sort of crammed things into my day that are unnecessary? And so it just, that's into the practice. And I'm sure everyone listening can relate to that in a certain way. It's like, oh yes, I do rush in these certain ways. And maybe today I do want to think about slowing down, and how can I be in the meditation of slowing down, of instead of rushing to make the coffee, what if making the coffee is a meditation, and I, put a little cinnamon in and I stir it really slowly, and I take a moment and I smell the coffee, and you could really have a time with it to make it really a meditation process in the slowing down. And then we of course feel that much more connected to divine, to our highest self, and certainly that's a liberation as well.
I love that. I love that. I love that truly. And I seriously feel that the blend is actually the best thing that can work for people around, and that is so nice. Also, let's talk about your book, which is Shine On and Off the Mat. It beautifully bridges practice and presence, and I'm really excited and really curious about this. So, what message do you hope that readers carry with them long after they've finished reading? Or what is that one message that you like to, you know, give to people through the book? And yes, the journey through it. Take us through it.
Yes. So Shine On and Off the Mat, it's a coffee table style book that has 52 themes, much like slowing down, let go, savor, where there's an entry point into the practice. I share a really short story about it, and each page is coupled with a photograph. And so you could easily skim through it. There's also the ability to really slow down with it. There's an interactive piece. So there are 3 practices that accompany each theme. There's 20-minute practices. So each of the practices are meant to really weave into your daily rhythm well. There's a guided meditation, which you're invited to do, of course, seated or on your morning walk. You might be in the bath, you might be on your commute, however it feels organic to you. There's a vinyasa style class. So that's this breath with movement practice. The invitation certainly is you could find your home practice space, or you might feel inspired to take it to the park, to the beach. Maybe there's a little sanctuary you can make for yourself. And then there's a yin stretch practice. And so you could do this laying on your area rug, somewhere cozy, maybe even in bed. And there's this invitation where you can weave these practices in separately, or you could do all three together, and that would be your 60-minute practice. And because it's unique themes for the week, you could spread it out throughout the week. There's really great practice to do the practice every day for the week to integrate it further. And then there's an accompanying music playlist for each of the themes, and as well as a journal prompt. So the invitation is then you get to be a part of the storytelling process, right? So for example, for the let go theme, you can journal what it is that you're letting go of. And so shine on and off the mat, it's what allows you to feel vibrant on and off the mat. It's the yoga practice as a lifestyle. So the way that you cook, the way that you eat, the way that you're having thoughts, the way that you're in conversation, as you're driving, as you're commuting, as you're folding the laundry, all the things that we may do on any given day, it's a mindfulness. And certainly it is a practice. There might be moments where we're on our drive or on our commute, and all of a sudden we're further than we had intended to because our mind went somewhere else. And so more and more, it's just getting more adept at recognizing that and then coming back to the now. And so through this lens of divine, like we had initially talked about, it's how do we connect to our light, right? However you want to orient to the word shine for you. So it's what allows you to feel energetic or radiant. And that could be the physical yoga practice. It could also be other parts of the yoga practice. And I've definitely gone through seasons where I felt like I just wanted hot vinyasa. I wanted to sweat and feel like I couldn't do anymore. And then I've also gone through seasons where I just want to sit and be very still. And so really recognizing that for yourself, that shining isn't, ignoring the darkness. In fact, it's allowing light to come through the darkness, like we had talked about, that through the shadows, we can actually illuminate the light and they can cohabitate. And so that's the hope with the book. That's the hope with the practice, is that there's an integration to the physical practice into all aspects of your life, and that you're able to really share that. And then when you do, I really see that as each of our light beams, they touch one another. And then, like we had talked about, it's like you meet someone's eyes and it's like, good to see you again. And then that person lights up and we sort of like re-illuminate one another, and then we share that and we share that, so that we can be in that connection of collective light beings.
That is so refreshing, and I truly am looking forward for this book. And congratulations on that. And
Thank you.
to our listeners, I would deeply and very nicely request you to read the book, because the message that Veronique has shared with us today, it is more than anything that you need. And Veronique, thank you for bringing your light, grace, and wisdom to Divine Decode. Conversations like this, they remind us that, spirituality, it isn't about distance. It is about intimacy. It is about yourself. And it's about listening to the quiet within and realizing that the divine has always been waiting for us there. And this is my major takeaway from you today. And to everybody who is listening, may this conversation inspire you to breathe a little slower, move a little softer, and remember that the divine is not a destination. It is a state of presence found in every breath, every act of awareness, and every choice to begin again. So, until next time, I am Pragya Malvia, and this has been Divine Decode. Thank you for listening, and may you always find light in your own unfolding. And thank you, Veronique. Thank you so much for this amazing conversation. And I truly look forward to more such conversations like these ahead in future. And thank you for all the insights that you've shared with us today.